Imagine that you are standing on the banks of the Tiber, in the heart of one of the most powerful and influential civilizations in human history. Before you rises a city where law, military strength, political ambition, and engineering brilliance were united into one force. Here, decisions were made that shaped continents, laws were written that still influence the modern world, and an empire was built that would dominate the Mediterranean for centuries. Today, we are talking about ancient Rome, how it began, how it rose to greatness, why it became so powerful, and how, in the end, it fell. To understand Rome, we must begin with Italy itself. The Apennine Peninsula had many natural advantages: a mild climate, fertile land, rich pastures, and access to the sea. These conditions favored farming, trade, and communication with other peoples. In the first millennium BCE, Italy was inhabited by many tribes and cultures, each developing at its own pace. Among the most important were the Etruscans, who lived in northwestern and central Italy. Their civilization was highly advanced. They had cities, religion, writing, skilled metalwork, and strong political structures. Their influence on early Rome was profound. The Romans borrowed from them elements of religion, symbols of political authority, military organization, and urban construction. The Greeks also played a major role. Southern Italy and Sicily were home to many Greek colonies. These cities brought with them writing, political ideas, art, philosophy, and trade networks. For the peoples of Italy, Greek civilization became a model of urban life and state organization. In central Italy lived the Latins. It was among them, on the banks of the Tiber, that Rome emerged. Over time, tribal communities began to unite. Social inequality increased, and the first forms of city life appeared. According to legend, Rome was founded by the twin brothers Romulus and Remus. The famous story tells how they were abandoned as infants, suckled by a she-wolf, and later quarreled, with Romulus killing Remus and becoming the first king of Rome. Whether the legend is true is less important than what it meant to the Romans. From the beginning, they saw their city as something chosen by fate. Roman tradition says that after Romulus there were 6 more kings. Some were remembered as builders, others as warriors, and some as religious reformers. Numa Pompilius, for example, was associated with the organization of Roman religion and ritual. Tullus Hostilius was remembered as a warlike ruler, while Ancus Marcius expanded Roman territory and strengthened the city. The last kings were linked to Etruscan influence, suggesting that Rome in the 6th century BCE was deeply shaped by Etruscan civilization. The final king, Tarquinius Superbus, or Tarquin the Proud, was remembered as a tyrant. His expulsion became one of the defining myths of Roman history. After he was overthrown, the Romans swore they would never again allow a king to rule them. That moment marked the beginning of the Roman Republic. Under the Republic, supreme authority was placed in the hands of elected magistrates. The most important were the 2 consuls, who held office for 1 year and checked each other's power. Other officials handled finance, law, and city administration. In emergencies, a dictator could be appointed for a short period. Formally, this was a system based on shared rule and civic participation. In practice, however, early Republican Rome was dominated by the patricians, the old aristocratic families. They held most political power, controlled the Senate, and owned much of the land. The plebeians, the wider body of free citizens, had fewer rights and often suffered from debt and social inequality. For generations, Rome was marked by conflict between patricians and plebeians. The plebeians demanded access to office, protection from debt slavery, and a more equal share in public life. Over time, they won important victories. The office of tribune was created to defend their interests. Roman law was written down in the 12 tables. Gradually, plebeians gained access to political office. In the end, a new ruling elite emerged, combining old aristocratic families with wealthy plebeians. This long internal struggle helped make Rome more stable and more flexible than many of its rivals. Rome's military strength grew step by step. At first, it was only one city among many in central Italy. It fought its neighbors constantly: Etruscans, Sabines, Latins, Samnites, and others. The Roman army in this early period was a citizen militia, but Rome had a crucial advantage. It was persistent. Even after defeats, it rebuilt, reorganized, and continued fighting. One of the most dramatic moments in early Roman history came when the Gauls invaded and sacked the city in the 4th century BCE. The shock was enormous. Yet Rome recovered, strengthened its defenses, and resumed its expansion. By the end of the 4th and beginning of the 3rd century BCE, Rome had subdued Latium and defeated the Samnites in a long and difficult series of wars. Then came conflict with the Greek cities of southern Italy. Those cities called on King Pyrrhus of Epirus, a brilliant Hellenistic commander, to help them. Pyrrhus won battles against Rome, using war elephants and superior tactics, but his losses were so severe that his victories became meaningless. This is why we still use the expression Pyrrhic victory. In the end, Rome forced him to leave Italy. After that, Rome had effectively mastered the entire peninsula. But control of Italy was only the beginning. Rome's next great rival was Carthage, the wealthy maritime empire of North Africa. The struggle between Rome and Carthage became known as the Punic Wars. The First Punic War was fought largely over Sicily and forced Rome to build a navy and learn the art of sea warfare. Rome won and acquired its first overseas provinces. The Second Punic War was far more dangerous. Hannibal, Carthage's greatest general, led his army across the Alps and invaded Italy. He inflicted devastating defeats on the Romans, especially at Cannae, one of the worst military disasters in Roman history. Yet Rome did not surrender. That was one of the secrets of Roman power, an extraordinary ability to endure, adapt, and continue. Eventually, the Roman commander Scipio Africanus carried the war into Africa and defeated Hannibal at Zama. Carthage was broken. In the Third Punic War, it was destroyed completely. After defeating Carthage, Rome became the dominant power in the western Mediterranean. It then turned eastward. Through wars with Macedonia and the Seleucid Empire, Rome spread its influence over Greece, the Balkans, and parts of Asia Minor. By the 2nd century BCE, Rome had become the leading power of the Mediterranean world. Yet conquest changed Rome itself. Wealth flooded into Italy, and with it came enormous numbers of slaves. Great estates, or latifundia, expanded at the expense of small farmers. Many citizens lost their land and drifted into the cities. Social tensions increased, and slave uprisings became more frequent. The most famous of these was the revolt led by Spartacus. At the same time, Rome's political system was struggling to govern a vast empire. The Senate had been designed for a city-state, not for a Mediterranean superpower. Corruption spread through provincial administration, inequality deepened, and political conflict grew more violent. In this atmosphere, reformers tried to act. Tiberius and Gaius Gracchus attempted to redistribute land and strengthen the position of poorer citizens, but both were killed. Their deaths showed that the Roman Republic was entering a period of crisis. That crisis deepened when military reform transformed the Roman army. Gaius Marius began recruiting poor citizens into the army and turning military service into a profession. This made Rome's forces more effective, but it also changed soldiers' loyalties. They increasingly became loyal not to the state, but to their generals. This was a turning point. Soon, Rome was torn apart by civil conflict. Marius and Sulla fought for control. Sulla marched on Rome itself and established a dictatorship. Violence, executions, and political terror entered Roman public life in a new way. The Republic was no longer secure. In the next generation, power came into the hands of ambitious military leaders such as Pompey, Crassus, and Julius Caesar. Together, they formed the first triumvirate. Caesar was sent to Gaul, where he conquered vast territories and built a loyal, battle-hardened army. When the Senate ordered him to surrender command, he crossed the Rubicon and began civil war. Caesar defeated Pompey and became the dominant ruler of Rome. He introduced reforms and strengthened central authority, but many Romans feared that he aimed at monarchy. In 44 BCE, he was assassinated by a group of senators led by Brutus and Cassius. Yet his death did not save the Republic. It only led to another cycle of civil war. After Caesar's assassination, his adopted heir Octavian, Mark Antony, and Lepidus formed the second triumvirate. They crushed their enemies and then turned on one another. The final struggle ended at the Battle of Actium, where Octavian defeated Antony and Cleopatra. In 27 BCE, Octavian received the title Augustus. Officially, the Republic still existed. The Senate remained, magistrates were still elected, and old institutions survived. But in reality, power was concentrated in one man's hands. The Roman Empire had begun. Augustus was an extraordinary ruler. He understood that Rome was exhausted by civil war and needed peace and stability more than reckless expansion. He created a professional standing army, reorganized the provinces, improved taxation, supported trade, repaired infrastructure, and launched major building projects. He famously claimed that he found Rome a city of brick and left it a city of marble. Under Augustus, Rome entered a long period of relative peace known as the Pax Romana. He also understood the importance of appearances. He did not openly call himself king. Instead, he styled himself princeps, the first citizen. This allowed him to preserve the outward forms of the Republic while exercising imperial power in practice. After Augustus came Tiberius, a capable but dark and suspicious ruler. Then came Caligula, whose short reign became famous for cruelty, instability, and excess. After his assassination, Claudius came to power and proved to be a more effective ruler than many expected. Under him, Britain was conquered and the imperial administration became more developed. After Claudius came Nero. His early rule was moderate, but over time his government became associated with repression, extravagance, and political instability. He was accused of cruelty, vanity, and misrule. The Great Fire of Rome became the defining event of his reign. Whether or not he was responsible, the disaster damaged his authority. Eventually, Nero lost all support and took his own life. With him, the Julio-Claudian dynasty came to an end. A brief period of chaos followed, until Vespasian founded the Flavian dynasty. He restored order, improved finances, and strengthened the imperial system. It was under him that work began on the Colosseum, one of the most famous monuments of Rome. His son, Titus, completed it, though he ruled only briefly. Domitian, the next emperor, strengthened personal rule but was eventually assassinated. After Domitian came a more stable and prosperous period, ruled by Nerva, Trajan, Hadrian, Antoninus Pius, and Marcus Aurelius, the so-called Five Good Emperors. Under Trajan, the empire reached its greatest territorial extent. He conquered Dacia and campaigned in the east. Hadrian, by contrast, recognized that endless expansion was no longer wise. He focused on securing the borders, fortifying frontiers, and consolidating the empire. Antoninus Pius maintained peace and legal stability. Marcus Aurelius, the philosopher-emperor, spent much of his reign defending the frontiers against Germanic and Eastern enemies. This was the high point of Roman civilization. Roads, cities, trade routes, military systems, law, taxation, and administration held together a vast territory stretching from Britain to Syria. Roman citizenship, culture, and institutions spread far beyond Italy. In many ways, this was the empire at its strongest and most stable. But after Marcus Aurelius came Commodus, whose reign marked the end of this golden age. He was more interested in spectacle and personal glory than in governing. Corruption increased, political instability returned, and the balance between emperor, senate, and army began to break down. After him, a new dynasty arose under Septimius Severus. The empire became more openly military and bureaucratic. The army gained even more political influence, and the Senate declined further. Caracalla, one of Severus's successors, granted Roman citizenship to all free inhabitants of the empire. This was a momentous act, but it also reflected deeper changes in the nature of Rome itself. In the 3rd century, the empire entered a severe crisis. Emperors rose and fell rapidly, often through military revolt. Civil wars multiplied. Provinces broke away. Trade weakened, cities declined, and the economy suffered. At the same time, barbarian invasions and Persian attacks struck the frontiers. This was one of the darkest periods in Roman history. Recovery began under Diocletian. He transformed the empire into a more rigid and openly autocratic state. The emperor was no longer merely the first citizen, but a distant and sacred ruler. Administration was reorganized, taxes were restructured, and the empire was divided for easier rule among multiple emperors. Diocletian also launched major persecutions of Christians, but his reforms helped stabilize the state. The next major turning point came under Constantine. He legalized Christianity through the Edict of Milan and laid the foundations for its rise within the empire. He also founded a new capital, Constantinople, on the site of Byzantium. This shifted the political center of gravity eastward and changed the future of the Roman world. In the 4th and 5th centuries, Rome faced pressures it could no longer fully control. The migrations of peoples, accelerated by the movement of the Huns, pushed Germanic tribes toward the empire's frontiers. Some entered as enemies, others as settlers or soldiers. Rome increasingly relied on barbarian troops to defend its borders, a sign both of flexibility and of weakness. Theodosius I was the last emperor to rule a united Roman Empire. After his death in 395, the empire was permanently divided into eastern and western halves. The east, centered on Constantinople, was wealthier and more resilient. The west was weaker, more fragmented, and more vulnerable. In 410, the Visigoths sacked Rome. The psychological impact was immense. The eternal city, which had once seemed invincible, had fallen. More disasters followed. In 455, the Vandals plundered the city again. The Western Empire increasingly became a shell of its former self, ruled by weak emperors and dominated by powerful generals of barbarian origin. By the 5th century, imperial authority in the West was collapsing. In 476, the Germanic leader Odoacer deposed the last Western Roman emperor, Romulus Augustulus. Traditionally, this date marks the fall of the Western Roman Empire. Rome did not collapse because of one single cause. It was weakened by political instability, economic strain, military overdependence on ambitious generals, corruption, social inequality, demographic decline, and constant pressure on its borders. Climate change and migration added further strain. The empire did not fall in a single dramatic moment. It eroded over centuries. And yet Rome did not truly disappear. The Eastern Roman Empire, which we call Byzantium, survived for nearly another 1,000 years. Roman law, Latin language, political thought, architecture, engineering, and the idea of empire continued to shape Europe and the Mediterranean world long after the fall of the West. Rome's legacy is immense. It gave the world legal principles, administrative models, urban planning, monumental architecture, roads, aqueducts, and a powerful image of statehood. Latin became the foundation of many modern languages. Roman law influenced legal traditions across Europe. Roman political ideas, whether admired or criticized, never stopped mattering. That is why the history of Rome is not simply the story of an ancient state. It is the story of how a civilization rises, expands, rules, transforms itself, enters crisis, and leaves behind a legacy greater than its own existence. Rome fell, but Rome did not vanish. Its roads became the roads of Europe. Its law became the foundation of legal systems. Its language gave birth to new languages. Its architecture became a model for centuries. Its vision of power, citizenship, and civilization still shapes the world today. And so, standing in imagination on the banks of the Tiber, we are not simply looking at an ancient city. We are looking at one of the greatest foundations of world civilization.